Okay. So welcome everyone. Let's get started. We're delighted to have you all here today for another Honest Conversations. We are the Discoverability Network, and today's topic is about hiring the best candidate, breaking stereotypes. So today's topic, I think, actually deserves its own slide. So if you look on the screen, you can see that I've put 3 bold-faced types, and this actually came out of conversations that we had on our team about how some of us, I self-identify as an individual with a disability. We notice that oftentimes when we're having chats with people, it sometimes comes up that, oh, she only got hired because, and then, you know, whatever the disability is, because she has a wheelchair, because she has a disability. We hear a lot of talk about, well, that company needed to fill a quota, or that person just wasn't the best candidate, they got hired because of their disability. And these are all stereotypes. And in fact, they're kind of hinting towards reverse discrimination. There are so many stereotypes associated with people with disabilities. There's the tragic yet brave, one of my least favorite, less able to do the job. Ronald pointed that out to me in previous conversations. I think it's probably the one that stands out. That somehow, by getting accommodations or being hired, people with disabilities are receiving special treatment instead of being hired for their skills and abilities. There's this idea that people with disabilities, that's that word PWD up there, are sick or in constant pain, or they're helpless and dependent. None of these are, you know, they may apply to some people, but they're definitely not something that we can apply broad strokes to a whole group of people. So instead, I would love us to go, what an amazing hire, employee of the year, which is actually a young man that I helped place in a consulting company downtown, right? I'd love to have people go, wow, they really need to continue to hire outside the box. It's improved the company. Or that diversity of perspective or thought has improved our services and products. There are so many real advantages to employing people with disabilities. Number one, for employers, it allows you to pick from a larger group of people. And we're facing labor shortages right now. So that's actually a big deal. But there's also reduced costs for the employer related to turnover, training, and safety. There's a lot of data that shows it improves the engagement of all employees. And I think for me, the most exciting is harnessing the value of innovative processes and new perspectives that come from when you work with somebody who has a disability. And I'm hoping Ronald will share a story about buying a car. Ronald, do you think I can twist your arm on that?
Sure, definitely. Do you want to talk about it now? Or
No, we'll get to it, but don't forget. So that said, I want to introduce you to today's guest speakers. So we are delighted to have 2 individuals who can speak to this from the employment space, from advocating space. So we've got Tayaba Azim, who is an advocate for people with speech difference or impediments and other disabilities. She runs Speak Up, which is a global initiative to empower people with disabilities in their professional as well as personal lives. She conducts training sessions to create awareness about the issues that people with disabilities face and how companies can be more sensitive while interacting with people with disabilities. She also pushes for more employment opportunities. She has her master's degree from Brandeis University on a Fulbright scholarship, a little daunting, and graduated with distinction. She moved to Canada from Pakistan a few years back and is currently working at CIBC in risk management. Welcome, Tayaba.
Thank you.
We also have with us today Ronald Peters. Now, Ronald, I've known for many years. Ronald's a senior human resources consultant for diversity and inclusion at the City of Toronto, where he works to attract talent and build an inclusive workforce at the city. Prior to that, Ronald worked as an inclusive recruitment specialist in the financial services sector for over 4 years. He has significant experience working with equity-deserving candidates who are seeking meaningful employment. And he's one of my go-to guys when I'm looking for advice in the recruitment field. So welcome, Ronald.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
Now, before we get started with my long list of questions that I have, is there anything else you'd like to throw in there or want people to know about you before we start?
Sure. Again, thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I love doing events like this because I'm a firm believer in having these conversations. The more and more information we get out there, the more we help to break stereotypes and normalize a lot of efforts. As you mentioned in my introduction, I've been in this space for a while now, so probably over 6 years now, and I could say, it's really been a journey, and it's been really interesting to watch the transformation of the whole diversity and inclusion space and what we think it is. Early on, when we said diversity and inclusion, it was, oh yeah, we need to get more women hired, or we need to get more women promoted, get them onto the board. And I think we've been wildly successful at that. Of course, there's still room for improvement, but we've been wildly successful. As time has gone on, we've seen more and more diversity groups coming into the picture. Canada, by its very nature, we have a lot of newcomers to Canada, so they weren't part of that conversation as well. And of course, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, with the whole George Floyd incident at the beginning of the pandemic, it sort of put into focus, the Black community and from a recruitment standpoint, Black talent. So the diversity and inclusion conversation again has expanded. And I think because of all these groups coming up, we're now seeing the whole notion of persons with disabilities and disability inclusion. It's naturally now bubbling up to the surface. So now the whole inclusion and diversity space is really, again, very inclusive now. I think we're capturing the breadth of the movement, and I'm so happy for that. I'm getting invited to more and more of these conversations specifically for persons with disabilities. So again, I'm excited for the conversations.
Excellent. And Tayaba?
Yeah, I would also like to say that I'm extremely happy to be here, and I love the topic. I think it is something which should be talked about. And in fact, in the past, in some of my trainings which I have conducted, I had a similar goals, because in a few of them, I talked about how companies can be more sensitive to while interacting with people with disabilities, and something which I am very staunch about. I don't think that any of these conversations should be taken as an attack on anyone. I think the whole idea is that we just need to come together and we need to talk about the issues that people with disabilities are facing, and so through Speak Up, I have been involved in those discussions where I bring employers and people with disabilities on the same page, so that because I feel that sometimes people without disabilities don't know, they feel a bit uncomfortable because they think that they can say the wrong thing, but I, through my work, I have been emphasizing that we need to come on the same page, and we need to talk about the issues which people are facing, because a lot of times when people talk about issues, it is considered as complaining sometimes, and when we consider things as as complaints, then we don't really solve those issues. So I am extremely happy to be here, and I look forward to the whole discussion.
Well, I'm delighted you're both here. So let's dive in. I think you both raised some really interesting points. So if we can revisit those, or if people, want to ask questions about that, that's great. So let's start off with, how do you think stereotypes act as a barrier to employment for people with disabilities? And can you share perhaps some experiences where you, or maybe somebody you've known, has experienced stigma in the employment sector because of disability? I'm going to turn this over to Ronald first.
Sure. Good question. I think, when it comes to barriers to employment and stereotypes, I think two people get impacted, right? So for the business or for managers, negative perceptions, negative stereotypes may cause employers to sometimes overlook great talent, right? Because there's a perception that this person maybe can't do the job or whatnot, we may overlook somebody who might be actually the right fit for the role. I think on the other side, for candidates, persons with disabilities, we're hearing the stereotypes as well, and sometimes we know it's not true, but just the stereotypes being present and always visible, it could sometimes impact us as well as persons with disabilities, right? And just by the way, just for sort of self-disclosure, I myself, I'm a person with disability. I can't use my right hand and right leg, so I walk with a bit of a limp. But yeah, so sometimes, sometimes those stereotypes feed into you. As much as you say, oh, no, I don't believe in that, sometimes you might start to take it on, so that the stereotypes sometimes works against the candidate, because now I'm thinking, oh, this company won't hire me, so I don't apply to that company. Or this role, oh no, they wouldn't look at me for this role. So that's why I think stereotypes are so dangerous, and we got to keep working to break them down.
Yeah, there's a lot of studies that show that, the media, how we're portrayed, what we see, who we interact with, they do affect us, even if we're the group that the stereotype is being targeted to. So I think that's an important point for you to bring up.
Yeah.
Tayaba, same question. So stereotypes, are they a barrier to employment?
Yeah, so I agree with that, and I would just like to add that I think, in my view, even the term disability, in some ways, it implies some kind of an inferiority. And so I think it just adds to the whole stereotype of incompetence. And, as you had said earlier, perhaps incompetence is one of the biggest stereotype which we face. And on the flip side, I think I have seen this other stereotype as well, where people think that if you have a disability, you can be hired, sure, but you have to be some kind of genius. Someone who's just exceptional. So somebody likes Stephen Hawking, or somebody who's just extremely smart, and then companies will be okay to hire you. So if anybody is just falling in the middle, it is a huge barrier, I feel, because it does curtail employment opportunities.
It's actually interesting you say this, and I have not got this written down, but I want to just mention it quickly. So this term disability, because there is a lot of discussion about should we use a different term, right? Because it does have a negative, DIS, on the beginning. And that's generally associated with not, you know. That's my preferred terminology as a person with a disability. Of course, you get to choose what words you want to use to describe yourself or how you self-identify. But generally, I think it's the clearest word we have out there. Because if we start saying things like exceptional or special or people with abilities, well, everybody has them. So I'm actually think it's the best word we have. I agree with you, Tayaba, that it's got some connotations, but maybe we can work towards changing those. Ronald, what do you think of that?
No, I sort of agree with you as well. As much as I would love to, eventually, if we can get rid of that word eventually, but for now, it's certainly the word that is used. And of course, whenever I'm engaging, especially in a or corporate setting, and like if I'm sending an email to a recruiter or a manager, or I'm just talking about disability, I always say, "Oh, this is a person with a disability," or "I have several candidates with disabilities," right? So I try to put the person, the candidate first so that we ground it. It's just, oh, this is somebody who just happened to have something else going on. So yeah, but that's kind of my take on things.
It's its own conversation. We could have a
Right.
whole session on it, but I did want to mention that. The other thing, Tabitha, that I think you said that's so interesting is that whole idea of people feeling the pressure to be exceptional, right? And you chose Stephen Hawking's. When I think of disability, Rain Man comes to mind because of my age, and that was a big movie. But I also think a lot of the portrayals we see are athletes who have succeeded and again excelled. So there is that pressure, whether it's real or not. And Ronald, I think this is where you were saying we pull that in, we carry that ourselves, but there is that pressure. So thank you for joining it today and normalizing the discussion. Okay, Tayaba, what do you believe is the most harmful stereotype that people with disabilities face when they're looking for work? And do you have any ideas for how to address that stigma?
So I think for me, in my experience, I think the biggest stereotype and the most harmful is incompetence. I think whenever people think of anybody with a disability, almost automatically they think that the person must be incompetent. And so and particularly when you talk about work, and the whole idea is that you have to hire the best candidate. So somebody who is considered incompetent will obviously not be considered the best candidate for that role. And then something similar to that is the ability to fit in. I think people, a lot of times, I personally feel that the corporate world was basically made by able-bodied people for able-bodied people. And so everything which you find at the workplace, in terms of ergonomics, in terms of culture, everything predominantly has been geared towards able-bodied people, and we are just trying to fit in, and so a lot of times there is this stereotype that we don't really have the ability to fit in to that culture, and therefore people may feel uncomfortable when we are there.
So true. Now, Ronald, this would be a perfect point for your car story.
Yeah, no, sure, I'll get to that in a second, but I just want to hold on to one point that Tayaba was saying, because it's some of the work that we're trying to do internally at the city as well. But this whole notion, the culture of a place, right? Tayaba says, designed for able-bodied persons, for able-bodied people. We're doing a lot of work now around expanding what we mean by workplace culture. Because workplace culture, we need to have all those different perspectives in those spaces. So we're trying to do a lot of work. And again, this kind of answers your question, what we can do to address the stigma. But in terms of how we broaden our systems and broaden our cultures, is we need to hear voices of staff members who have persons with disabilities, or again, for other diversity groups as well, right? So, we have pride networks in the workplace, Black staff networks, Indigenous staff networks, and there's different months throughout the year when they have things to celebrate. We try to bring these things to the forefront. So we have events where everybody's included, and we want to have that conversation going. Again, because I'm thinking about the second order effects. I'm looking for the next generation of people coming into the workplace. I want persons with disabilities to feel more comfortable coming into a space because the culture is prepared to have them there. So I think that whole notion of getting other perspectives in the workplace is so valuable. And now, and of course, coming to your point again, yes, I'm saying different perspectives from a culture standpoint, but and you sort of mentioned it on one of your earlier slides, right? Getting different perspectives in the organization could impact your products and services that you offer, and you sort of maybe enhance. You can probably reach different target markets you never even thought about reaching before. So I was mentioning to Lisa in a previous conversation, I've been recently looking at purchasing a vehicle. So it'll be my first vehicle I'm buying here in Canada. So, usually when they advertise vehicles, it's all about the speed or horsepower or, or the coolness of it or whatever the case may be, which is good for a lot of people. But for somebody like myself who can't use my right hand, when I went to the dealership, I'm looking at, okay, is it easy for me to get in out of the driving seat? Can I easily access all the instrument panels, the gearbox, and is everything at arm's length, or is it awkward to drive? Safety is an important thing for me. I need to make sure you provide roadside assistance, because if something happens on the road, I want to make sure that I can call someone, because I might not be able to change a tire in a rush. So those are some of the perspectives I bring to it. So the guy who was showing me the car, he was like, "Oh yeah, we have a 3-cylinder engine, and it does this and it does this." And I'm like, I have no idea what that means. All right, yes, the car looked nice, and that was important for sure. But I want to know that I can comfortably access it. Hey man, once the car can get me from point A to point B, I'm good. But the comfort, the experience, and the accessibility features were primary for me. So just how we go to market with some of these products and services, I think a lot of people could learn to make sure to have different perspectives in the room when they're doing that sort of planning. So again, just some examples of the power of having that diverse culture, diverse employee base, and the impact it can have long term.
I think it's so true, and I do think that there's so many ways we don't think about constructing culture or workplaces as well. So I know for me, I get overwhelmed when people keep calling me, or somebody shoots a short email off and wants an immediate response, and then another one, and I'm looking at my inbox and there's 300 of them, and I'm just like, after a week of that, it's overpowering. So there's lots of different ways of experiencing the world, the culture, the workplace, and we need to think about better ways to do that.
Oh yeah, I think we have another point.
Yeah, exactly. A positive image of disability should be fair, accurate, and it should promote equity and inclusion. It should be, I think, based on the social model of disability. So that idea that we're not trying to deal with somebody's personal features of their body or an impairment. We're actually looking about the constructed environment and how we can make changes so that it works for everyone, what we've been talking about. Do you think that media representation of people with disabilities is accurate? And what are some suggestions to perhaps address that imbalance? Ronald, we'll start with you.
Is it inaccurate? Maybe not inaccurate per se, but certainly skewed. Tara was talking about, that exceptional person, the Stephen Hawking type person. I often think about that. There's that TV show, The Good Doctor. Don't get me wrong, I watch it, I enjoy it, it's fine, but it is again that whole exceptionalism. Okay, yeah, give it to the doctor. He will be able to analyze it and find the solution for us. And again, that's a good feature to have as a characteristic when you're applying for a job, but that should not be the be all and end all of why you want me there, right? I would love to see more media representation of people just living, just existing, all right? Whether it is advertisements that are being put up, from posters to video to social media content, or to the stories that we tell. All right, movies are so important for me anyway. I love movies. I want to see, a rom-com with persons with disabilities just having living their life, and it's okay to be messy and have a redemption story arc. Don't start off and end off with perfection. That's unrealistic in my view. And again, I just think it'll be good to have that, because we can really start to have those. We don't surround ourselves to the water cooler anymore, but it's that Monday morning water cooler conversation. Oh yeah, you watched that show last night, and then we start talking about the characters and their faults, and we forget, or not forget, but we're just not talking about disability as much. So that's kind of where I would love to see media representation get expanded, to really help normalize and break some of those stereotypes as well.
What about you, Tayaba? What's your take on media representation, or, just generally how people with disabilities are portrayed?
Yeah, so I think, for a lot of people who don't have a disability, what they watch on TV or, in movies, sometimes for that particular type of disability, that is the first interaction that they have with such a person. And so if they come across a particular type of or stereotype which is being pushed by that show or by that movie, a lot of times people will just stick with that because they don't know anything else. So I can talk about people who have a stutter, and in fact, even before I go there, I do want to talk about how people with mental health issues, the way they are portrayed in a lot of shows, I think it just complicates things, because a lot of times they are shown to be serial killers and all that kind of stuff, which just makes things worse for somebody with a mental health issue. And so, and then if I talk about people who stutter and how they are portrayed in the media. So ever since I was a kid, I have seen in shows, in movies, that people who if there is a character who has a stutter, almost always that person is shown to be timid and underconfident, and almost always they will show that stuttering is caused by some kind of a trauma or some kind of it could be some kind of bullying, and that leads to a stutter. So it may be true for some people, but I think for the large majority, I don't think it is the case. And in the past, there hasn't been a lot of research on stuttering and the causes of it. So these type of perceptions have been the norm. And now there is a lot more research which shows that it has to do with the part of the brain that deals with speech. So the whole idea about confidence and not taking any stress and all of that is now being addressed, that it may not be the cause. And so on the one hand, we see people who stutter are being shown as timid and underconfident, which just adds to the stereotype of incompetence, right? And then on the flip side, you will see people who once had a stutter and now they they don't, and then they will come and talk about it. And so a lot of us who still have a stutter, we are kind of told by people that if they can do it, so why can't you, you know? And that just adds more and more uh, 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 pressure on us. And so I think so in a lot of ways, because I had been through that experience, I I would like to talk about why I had started my work with Speak Up. And so so one of the main reasons why I started this work was because I wanted to just normalize a stutter, because we don't hear it, we don't see it in the media. And in fact, I had talked to you earlier, and you know, I would like to say that you know, I started you know uh, uh, last week I went uh, back to work in person, and then you know, I have been fasting as well. And so all of that always takes a toll on my speech, because I haven't slept well and all that. And so so when I was asked by Lisa to speak at this event, you know, I said yes immediately, but then when at some point I realized that I was, you know, I just couldn't speak, like the words just wouldn't come out. And so I thought that that I will just email her and I will tell her that I can't do it. But then I thought that, I mean, I have made this commitment. And then the other thing is that I do this work, and the whole idea is to normalize a stutter. So then I have to come and talk about it. So then here I am.
What I loved about that, when you, because you had shared that with me, is that we shouldn't have a voice only when we're at our best. We should be, as to Ronald's point, be able to communicate at all times and be heard and participate in conversations, you know, just like everyone else. So I'm so glad you joined us today, because your voice is so important to this conversation. And it actually raises this whole issue of, so one, you know, number one, when we think of disability, we often think of visible disabilities. So if we look at somebody, we could see that they have a disability. I know in my case, I have an invisible disability. Most people wouldn't know that unless I raised that. So with that in mind, because I think it's about 70% of disabilities are invisible, how do we expand that idea, Ronald, of disability in the workplace? Because we can't see it. It's not a reminder.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And it's something, again, I'm seeing more and more of it coming to the forefront. The whole conversations around invisible disabilities in the workplace, you know, and primarily, like a lot of mental health stuff that it certainly leans towards. But you know, one, yes, we started trying to prepare our leaders, managers by having training programs and sessions talking about this kind of stuff. But you know, we are also trying to encourage, you know, candidates or employees who may need some sort of support to approach the organization to get that support, right? Disclosure, I know it's a very sensitive area, but if you need support and you don't ask for it and you have like an invisible disability, right? You're right, because if you see me walk into a room, you know I have a disability right away. It's a straightforward conversation. But if I don't know you have a disability, I will not be able to support or, you know, provide any adaptations, tools, resources to make you successful at your job. Um, I'm just left in a bind. And then 2 or 3 months down the road, we see your performance dropping off. And we're thinking, oh, what's going on here? You come off a performance review and you may reach the point where we say we have to dismiss you. Okay, not meeting targets, right? But then as you walk out the door, or just before you get out the door, you said, oh, I have a disability. Well, we didn't know. We can't help that. So there's a lot of training taking place to support managers, get them more aware and let them know of services that we can provide to support them. But we also have to do a lot more work with employees and candidates to let them know, hey, if we don't know, we can't help you. So there's a lot of things going on in that space right now.
I think it's on both sides too. So definitely it's the employer's responsibility to create a culture.
Yes.
Where you as a candidate or an employee feel safe to disclose. And that you understand how your information will be protected if you want it, because you have the legal right to that, or shared in a way that you're comfortable if that's okay. But then there's also that obligation as a person with a disability to kind of figure out what you need in order to excel. You know, I don't know about you guys. Do you mind if I ask what are some of the accommodations? Like for me, some of the accommodations, I sometimes take a week to work offline. I'm working, but I just can't deal with that influx of communication. And everybody reduces it, and it just helps me dramatically. I also usually wear headsets, and I prefer to see materials written out versus being spoken to. Those are all some of the workplace accommodations, and of course sitting and standing all the time because I'm getting old. Ronald, do you ever, or what are some of the common, it doesn't have to be your own, what are some of the common accommodations people have asked for in recruitment, as you've been in recruitment all these years?
Sure. So there's like 2 layers of accommodation. So there's accommodation during the recruitment process, and this is like accommodation for interviews, or sometimes they're like you may have to do like an assessment, an online testing. So a lot of accommodation requests I've seen, it's people asking for like more time. So some of these tests are timed tests, and we've been working with vendors to make sure that there's also a non-timed version, or a version where there's longer time. So we've seen a lot of those requests coming through. For interviews, I've seen in the past where somebody wanted to make sure it was okay to have their service animal come with them to an interview. And then there's just some other generic ones, like this was in the days of in-person interviews, making sure that the physical interview space is wheelchair accessible. I've come across that as well. Since the virtual times have started, I've had a situation where we had to make sure that we had ASL representation on the Zoom call, to make sure that the person, or closed captioning has been options that have been floated as well. I've actually also seen some managers who say, don't worry with setting up the virtual call. Sometimes they do a chat session, or I've seen some managers, very progressive, who will just like email the questions to the candidate, and the candidate types the responses and sends them back. Again, this is a unique one. Please don't ask that. I can't guarantee that's going to happen. But it's like I've seen a couple managers who have done that before. In one instance, a manager, the role that he was hiring for, and I think this was a person on the autism spectrum. They actually brought on 3 people on the spectrum. The division came to us and said, we only want people on the spectrum for a recruitment program they were doing. Okay. And that person, I think they only did one in-person, virtual interview. The other 2, I think they just did the sort of emails or like a chat session, because those 2 persons, their role wasn't going to involve engaging with people a lot. So the communication skill set was not their primary motivator. The other person who did get an interview, they were going to be customer facing, at least partially. So they wanted to sort of getting a sense of their capabilities in that regard. But yeah, I've been seeing some very progressive approaches to accommodation.
Yeah, I've seen one where actually somebody was neurodiverse. They disclosed that. And the interview was reformatted. So instead of asking the typical interview questions, they just went through the work product. And that worked very well. They got hired and Employee of the Year last year. Elizabeth Novak, we have your hand up. Do we have a couple questions?
We do have a question for Ronald Peters from the audience. This is from Melanie. She wants to know from Ronald, have you had any conversations with the Toronto film sector about hiring more diversity and about the depictions of people who have disabilities in Canadian TV and film? Because Melanie she's looking at hiring persons with disabilities, I think, in the near future. She's in the entertainment industry, so she's just very curious about this.
So I have not, my job has not brought me in touch with the film sector per se. So, and sorry, it's Melanie. So Melanie is a hiring manager. If she's part of the Toronto Public Service, feel free to send me an email and maybe we can chat further, or one of the sister agencies. Like I've taken calls with TTC, which isn't really part of the city of the Toronto Public Service that I'm under, but we can certainly have conversations and chats. So, but personally, no, I have not had to engage with the film sector in any format. So I'm hesitant to offer a response.
We actually had 2 recent webinars on the creative industry for people with disabilities on how to break in, how to find jobs. They're on YouTube. So if you want to have a look at that, Melanie, please feel free to reach out to Elizabeth and she might be able to connect you with some potential candidates. In terms of depictions of people, we're actually going to be doing a photography of just people going about their normal jobs, visible or invisible, but everybody in my training that I portray, if I show a picture, I want to be an actual person with a disability, because it really bothers me when we show people acting like they have a disability. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I go onto purchase a stock photo, and you see someone using a wheelchair in one, and then in the next one, they're signing. And they're not even, signing appropriately. I've had friends who sign and said that's not a good thing to be signing. Or the next one we see them, they're using a white tipped cane. So, we're actually going to be doing that. So if you want to be photographed, reach out to Elizabeth again, because we're going to be trying to depict what disability actually really looks like. Tiaba, in our last conversation, we spoke about this idea of dreams and portrayal and how it affects people's dreams. Do you mind, if you recall that conversation, speaking to that? Because I thought it was just such a powerful, for me, it was a really powerful learning moment.
Yeah, so I guess what I was talking about was how, and I think Ronald had also touched upon it earlier. So I think a lot of times we internalize things that are told to us, right? So one thing that I've always seen, and I'm just not happy with, whenever I come across a job ad, I see this statement right at the top, which says excellent communication skills required. And so, and when I look at that, and as a person who has a stutter, I look at that and I just feel that, okay, I mean, at the outset, they are saying that they want somebody who has fluent speech, right? Because excellent communication skills in the conventional sense means that you have fluent speech and you talk confidently. And because stuttering is, there is a perception that we stutter only because we lack confidence. So it just adds to the whole thing. So I have seen that in my life. I have seen that in a lot of other people's experiences as well, that when somebody has a stutter, in a lot of ways, they are made to dream small. And I say that because I know a lot of people who stutter and who are very smart and who have very high ambitions and who want to just grow in their careers. But in a lot of ways, they are told that till they fix their speech, they cannot rise in their careers. So in a lot of ways, we are made to dream small. We are made to just keep ourselves smaller, just contain ourselves in that box. And a lot of it has to do with the stereotype that a leader is supposed to have great speech. That's what a leader is supposed to do. He or she or they are supposed to be just completely fluent and just take over the room. And when there is a perception as strong as underconfident and nervous and timid about people who stutter, it just it makes it so much harder for people who stutter to just grow in their careers.
You're on mute.
Yes, thank you. That strikes me, it's so powerful the way you say that. And that actually strikes me that we've got a question in the chat that is somewhat related to that. And the question is it easy to ask for a job for somebody who has a disability? And I think it's no more or less difficult in reality than anybody else. It's hard to look for a job, period. It's hard to ask for a job. It's really important, like Taba said, to kind of understand what you're bringing to the table. And then be able to find some way to communicate that. But I'm going to get each to weigh in on that. You know, is it harder to ask for a job if you have a disability? And what are some tips?
So sorry, and just to clarify for me, when you say it's to ask for a job, you mean just to apply for a job, or you mean like to go to like a networking event and ask for a job? Just kind of ground
both, you know. So if you're in an interview and you have a disability, do you bring it up? If somebody's noticed it, how do you address it? Yeah, you know, just in general.
Yeah, okay. Sure, that could go several ways. Again, it's about perception, right? I would definitely say, you know, when you're applying for a role, I'm leading with how I can add value in that role. Okay, you want to lead off, this job is asking for XYZ. This is how I can relate to XYZ. Now, if you're really masterful at telling your story, right? You know, there may be opportunities where you can sort of dovetail your disability into how it adds to your strengths. But again, that varies from person to person.
And you use that word masterful, which as a former job coach, I'm going to say not many people are masterful about talking about their disability.
Right, exactly. And we are fully aware of that. But what I'll say though, even pulling back a little further, let's talk about when you start your job search process, okay? You want to look for companies, again, read up websites, do your research, do your background check, look for companies that start to give that indication of that inclusive culture. I know it's not always a guarantee, but we want to start to look for those indicators that are out there. Because I want you to be confident just to start the application process in the first place. So you want to look for some of those situations. I'm biased, but a lot of big corporations, the banks, the government, we have dedicated, and maybe we don't talk about it enough, there's actually dedicated resources to support applicants and employees with disabilities. All right. My team is a diversity and inclusion recruitment team.
And you do advertise on discoverability, which is another place to find an inclusive employer. So yeah.
Exactly. We actually, our team expanded. We have someone who is an accessibility talent specialist. Her only role is to promote jobs to community organizations like Discoverability about opportunities that are available, because we want to attract persons with disabilities to the organization, right? So, but having said that, of course, when you come in, once your application is in, and this is the other side, and this is where stereotypes and perceptions come back into play, right? I remember when I finished school and I was applying to jobs, I used to go to events exclusively for persons with disabilities. I apply to jobs and I get nothing back. And I feel like, wow, maybe it is because I disclose I have a disability that I'm not getting called back. Maybe that's the case for some instances, but I can also tell you, now that I'm in HR and I'm seeing on the back end, competition for roles are fierce.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to package yourself in your resume, how you tell your story, as well as in the interview when you get there, how you really speak about yourself. Because sometimes it comes down to the fact that just on the day, you were not really the best interviewee on that day. You were great on paper. I actually, literally yesterday, I had a meeting with a manager. So I referred someone to a manager in finance role. So this person has physical disabilities. I worked to ensure that he got accommodation when he had to do his assessments. So something that usually takes like 30 minutes, I think they gave him a whole hour to complete. He flew by the tests, got to the interview. So he was like top 10 and over 400 people applied.
Wow.
To the role. So he was part of the top 10 who got interviewed. He messaged me like last Friday and he said, "Oh, Ron, they just called me and tell me I didn't get the job." I'm like, "Oh man, I'm so sorry. I'm going to keep looking out for you." But I had the opportunity. The manager actually reached out to me because she knew I had referred this candidate. And she said, "I felt his passion as to why he wanted to work for the city." Oh, by the way, this is I'm talking about weaving your story in, right? So this person, just to give you some context, newcomer to Canada. He's been here several years now, and the question, so why I want to work for the city of Toronto? And it was, he sort of was able to weave in, his physical disability, and since he's come to the city, all the supports that are available in the city that he's benefited from, to make him feel welcome in the city. And the manager was blown away by that, right? Because she's like, oh my gosh, it ties into our mission in the city is to provide social goods and services to the population, 2.9 million people. We want to hear stories that we're successfully providing services. It's like, okay, we're achieving our mission. However, where he sort of fell down was some of the more technical questions. They were just looking for a little more depth in how he answered the question. So this person has a ton of experience, but how he answered the question is like, oh yeah, I did this. I'm just giving an example, right? So, oh yeah, I did this. The other people who responded said, oh yeah, I was part of the team that did this. What we did, we started off here, we created this project here.
For more
and
details.
we were able to reduce the cost of the budget or whatever it is by X%. It's about sometimes how you tell your story, not what you say. So smart guy had the experience on paper, but when asked about it in an interview, the other person just answered more in depth, that the people on the other side felt like, okay, this person gets it.
So it's nothing to do with the disability. We still need to be able to talk about what we can do and what we bring. Taya, do you have any advice for people job searching and how they tell their stories and how they present, as a strong candidate?
Yeah, so I would just, like to add to what Ronald has just said. I completely agree with him. And since this whole topic is about honest conversations, I think even as people with disabilities, we need to take an honest assessment of ourselves, right? And we need to see where we stand, right? And if we are applying for a job, we have to see, as Ronald said, we have to position ourselves in the best way, right? And positioning ourselves in the best way is through the words that we choose, the skills that we emphasize, and the stories that we tell, right? So all of that requires a lot of thought, and for that you really have to be self-aware. So I would also like to add that when I started out, I also, I faced a lot of rejections as well. And so at some point, I started to think that, okay, maybe there is something that I am also doing wrong, And so I started to then look at myself. And then I started to see where I was not positioning myself in the best way. So I think interviewing skills are crucial, and we need to know how to talk about ourselves. But then I also want to add that for certain disabilities, it may be harder to express ourselves also, even though we have the story, even though we have the skills. So I think for those of us who find it harder to express ourselves, it's completely okay to contact somebody who has a similar disability and is at a position in a company, and can help you just figure out where you can improve.
I love that idea. We're going to end that on finding perhaps a mentor or a sponsor, or just having an informational interview with somebody, not only in your field, that's great, but you could also have somebody with a similar disability who's faced similar challenges. So on that, I am going to thank both of you for participating. You guys were amazing. Thank you so much. And, keep making the world inclusive.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very much for having us.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.